Just a bit about myself. For I don't know how many of you here. Some of you might be former students of mine. I don't know. I've been teaching at the University of Colorado Denver for over 20 years now, which surprises even me. But so I'm happy that you have chosen to spend the evening with us here to hear about my writing and a little bit about fictionalizing your experiences, which is really the large part of what I do as a professional writer. I'm going to be reading from primarily from this book. Oh, I'm going to have issues. Yep, I'm going to have issues. The See Denver background messes things up. I'll put a link in the chat to the book. Let me see if I can turn off my background. Give me 1 second. There we go. So now you see my actual office, which luckily isn't too messy right now. So this is the book that I'll be reading from, Flatland, and I'll also be reading a couple of newer pieces that aren't in the book and talk about some of those. One of those pieces of Flash that I'm going to be reading from is from the novel that I just finished and that I'm getting ready to send out to different publishers and agents and things like that. That novel encompasses some flash fiction in it. For those of you who are uninitiated in terms of flash fiction, I just wanted to give a quick definition of what that is. Flash fiction are very short stories. Until about 20 years ago or so, flash fiction wasn't really the term. We called these things very short stories or microfiction. Those titles still exist a little bit, but flash fiction has really come into its own in the last 20 years, getting more and more popular. I first ran across it by working for a magazine called Quick Fiction, which was based out of Baltimore and focused just on flash fiction. And these are stories that are, generally speaking, under or around 500 words. And the idea of flash fiction is really intriguing to me because you have to tell a story. It has to feel like a full story, and you have to do it in a very small number of words. In that, it kind of crosses over into poetry a little bit. For me, and there are some poets that think this is anathema, and they disagree with this vehemently. But and I've had a lot of good chats about this with them over drinks usually. But I believe that flash fiction is really the place where fiction and poetry sort of meet. The difference between a narrative poem and a piece of flash fiction is virtually indistinguishable. And there are format differences sometimes, but it really is the place, I think, where it crosses over, at least in a kind of spiritual sense. They're definitely kissing cousins, if nothing else. So this, again, Flatland is the book of flash fiction, and this I'm happy to talk a little bit about the marriage of photography and story as well as we go. All of these stories have been paired with photos. The photos were taken by a very talented Midwest photographer named Britton Lee Trauber. She's my co-creator with this book. She's also my cousin, who I love very much and admire very much. And she and I talked for years about combining my writing centered in the Midwest and her photography centered in the Midwest. And we came up with this idea when I was back in Illinois visiting family one year, that we would combine them in a new way, that I would not I would not narrate her photographs, and her photographs would not illustrate my stories, but rather we would bring the two together and see how they spoke to one another in interesting ways. So the photographs were taken completely independently. My stories I wrote completely independently. And then we got together with the help of some a professor at Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, friend of mine, his name's Stephen Freck, and he ran a class on publishing. And we utilized his class to help us sort of put this book together as an educational exercise for the students. Jim, I see you in the chat there. You didn't miss very much, just pretty much who I am. So hi, I'm Teague Bolen, writer, teacher, professor, etc. We're just talking about flash fiction and Flatland. Yeah, please, I have the chat. I'm looking at the chat on my screen right now. So if anybody has any questions while I'm reading, I'm happy to field those when I'm done with the story. I'd like this to be as a conversation if it can be. So yeah, in any case, we decided that we were going to put together photographs and story. And both of us were focused on the people of the Midwest, these flatlands that we loved so much, and in similar ways, given that we were family maybe. And so we brought those photos together with the stories to sort of create a third entity. So there's the story and there's the photo, and then the combination of the two, since they're not directly related, at least purposefully related, they kind of create a new sense to them. And so in the interest of showing you a little bit about the book, I'm gonna read the story, and I'll show you the photo first. And then kind of go on from there, so you can put a photo to the story. Again, they're not illustrative; they're more open-ended. There are linkages, but you'll have to kind of fill those in. I think that's the challenge of the book. I'm gonna start with reading the title story. And the title story is just called Flatland, and it kind of talks about the project overall. So the photo for this is actually, the layout of this book is also pretty spectacular. It's along the bottom of the screen. It's just a very long, I keep meaning to get a print of this photo, this old barn on the horizon, the very flat horizon, for the walls of my house, but I haven't done that yet. I mean to at some point. So this is a story called Flatland. This is a place where a person can see everything coming. The earth is level, at least from a distance. The bubble is centered. There is nothing to move you. You can see it in the unrippled water. Where the land is flat, there's water everywhere. Culverts to towers, murky and potable. It feeds nursing mothers and tall grass and budding corn and braying animals. It comes carrying nothing for invitation, leaves carrying nothing for your thirst. It floods, it drowns, it quenches, it recedes. You will want the water when it's here, lament it when it is gone. There is no such thing as just enough. Your father lost his yields 2 years running because of water. The first year was drought, the dry dirt cracking wide as though opening its mouth, begging for rain that never came until it was too late. That year, your father prayed every night at supper, first for the rain and later for the grace to survive the year. But next season was no better, only different. The rain came then like a plague, squatting over the plains and refusing to move on. Stalks sat in water and rotted from the root, withering from the excess blessings that came too late. The joke was that folks had prayed too hard the year before, but the unspoken fear was that they'd not prayed hard enough. An act of God excuses itself, and a linear horizon might convince you that there are no mysteries. But this is a lie. There are dark lakes, wailing babies, wooded gullies, family dinners, abandoned trestles, church choirs, and deep and secret shadows that stretch across every backyard. It doesn't matter if you can see for miles, if you never bother to look up. And when you're here a while, when the flatness of the world gets into you, when you accept your position as a part of it, as another reason for the consistency of the horizon, you realize sometimes when something is this even, this expected, this calm, it begins to draw you down, creates negative slope. It pulls you into it inch by inch, promising to take you away. So that's the title story. And again, there's the photo for it. Pretty spectacular. I was really pleased to have my cousin's photos paired up with these, because it really did kind of bring a new element to the stories and the way that they were treated. This next story is well. Let me just say something about that story really quick. I think the idea of the Flash in that story in Flatland really has to do with the shared experience of people in that part of the country, or more specifically, to be fair, my perception of those people, my people, people from whom I come, in that part of the country. The interesting thing to me is that when I was writing this book, just like when I was writing my first novel was published back in 2007, and it was set in the same part of the country in the American Midwest, Illinois, Central Illinois to be specific. And it did well, won the Colorado Book Award. It was very it was well received. The surprise for me was that I thought I was writing a book that was just about Central Illinois, just about my experiences there and translating those to the page. And then I would go to readings around the country with this book. And the same thing has happened with Flatland, as I have traveled before pre-pandemic, as I traveled reading from this book. And that is that people really connected with these stories in a way that I was surprised by. I would have people come to me after a reading and say, I lived in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, and this was exactly the way that I remember it. These details resonated with me. And so it was a kind of an eye-opening thing for me in terms of my experience as a writer, in that I was able to break out of this sort of mindset that this was about a very specific place, and embrace the idea that this is really more about the human condition, especially as it pertains to rural communities, no matter what the industry is that supports those communities, be it farming, be it mining. The families, the people there are very much the same. And so those are some of the things that I was looking at in wanting to tell their stories, to tell the stories of these people in this place. This next one is actually a story that likewise came from my own experience, and also from it was actually born from an email that I got that was from well, you'll see what it's from. I almost quoted this directly in the story. So this the photo for this is this guy is on the previous page. His name is Gene. That's actually that's Gene Farmer, and he was in fact a farmer, which he thought was really funny. He's holding a bell pepper there, I believe, in his hand. And again, I think we put that with this story just because we liked the look on his face, I think, in reference to what this story wants to do. This is a story called Jesus Wants Me to Refinance. In my email this morning is this note from Christian Lenders USA. quote, leading mortgage refinancing site, unquote, that wants to help, quote, find the right lending partner for Christians of any credit history in accordance with biblical standards, unquote. And this, the same morning, my wife, Judy, leaves me, packs up her clothes and the good TV, and drives off in my F-150 to go stay with her folks for a bit. You don't have the sense God gave geese, Judy says to me, but I know a sign from Jesus when I see it. We don't own much. I know that too, but we have this house that my father left me when he died a few years ago, paid off and then mortgaged again due to our money troubles, what with being laid off from Firestone because a few pansy asses cried about their tires blowing out. Don't even have credit cards anymore, can't get any. When I bought my truck, I had to buy it in cash from the Stombaugh estate when the old man finally went boots up. So this seems right. Jesus wants me to refinance, and Jesus knows something about lending, money changers or something, pushed over some tables, didn't like the way things were run, so he took it to him. Maybe that's what these guys are doing, those Christian Lenders USA people, taking it to him. What would Jesus do? He'd refinance, that's what. It's not like Judy wants the finer things. She wants new towels. She wants to buy name brands from the grocery. She wants to be able to walk into Walmart and not have to worry about counting pennies. Me, I want to give her that, and that's not all. I want my financial sins to be forgiven. I want to accept the right lending agency into my heart. I want to be saved. So that story is one of the older ones in the book. I wrote that a number of years ago, and we had planned, a friend of mine had planned a book that never came to fruition, unfortunately, based on spam emails as sort of story prompts. And that idea came from that story. It's just a good example of what I was talking about when I mentioned earlier about writing from our own experiences, right? That's the old saw in writing classes. They always say, write what you know, right? And I tell my students that still. I still teach a number of classes every year, and I do tell them that because it's important. You have to, when we're telling stories, we are essentially filtering the creative spark, whatever that might be to you, and all of our experiences through this kind of creative funnel, which is character and situation and world. And through that narrative diegesis, we then kind of create this new story. But we're using all these elements of all these other stories that really happened to us or things we heard or what have you, right? It's all a big filtering process, really, essentially. Writing is just really bringing unlike things together and figuring out where they interlock. And so here with this story based on an email that I actually did get and wrote down because I just thought the combination of Christianity and a lending agency was sort of an odd one. I was able to use that as a springboard and create this other reality. The other thing that I was bringing together at that time was that my uncle at the time was actually going through a rather messy divorce, and I was kind of talking to him through that, and had to ask him when I was going to put this in the book, do you mind if I put this in the book? And he was generous enough to say yes. I guess enough time had passed that he didn't. This wasn't really about him, but still, some of the sentiment I think comes through. So again, writing from your own experience has some drawbacks, right? Writing from your own experience in a technical sense means that you can only write about those things, or maybe are supposed to only write about those things that you have directly experienced, that you've lived through, that you've seen and heard. And that is a limiting factor. And I had one of my favorite professors from my master's program at Arizona State used to say, he amended it a little bit. He said, I always write from my own experiences, whether I've had them or not. And he kind of meant that as a joke, but he also sort of meant that realistically, because we have to invest ourselves in a story in such a way that makes it seem to our readers as though we have lived through that. So if we're going to write a story about something with which we're unfamiliar, we have to do enough research on that to experience it vicariously through people that actually have, and then be able to recount those details, those realistic details, to back to an audience that will believe it, that will believe that we've lived through it. That's part of the responsibility of verisimilitude that a writer takes on. We have to convince our readers that what we are saying is worth hearing and worth reading. That's the biggest challenge. It's especially remarkable when it comes to things like sadness or anger. Every semester I have, especially in my advanced fiction classes, we have a week-long discussion about the nature of art, and that old question about what constitutes art. Is it enough that something just provoke emotion from a piece of art, including a story? And my answer to that is no, it's not, because provocation of emotion is easy. If you write a story in which a dog dies, or a child is abused, or something like that happens, people are going to be sad. You can make people sad very easily. You can make people outraged incredibly easily. The trick and the art, I believe, comes in when you, as a writer, can make a reader sad, or make a reader angry, or make them feel whatever, and then to have them, the reader, thank you at the end of that process, to think that that was a worthwhile emotion to feel. There was a reason that I felt that, and I needed to feel that. That's what a writer is going for. It's not just the response. It's the meaning behind the response. That's at the heart of it. It's also sort of about how they can relate to it. Like if you read something, you say, oh, yes, I've experienced that in some way, right? And it could be detail. It could be that you've lived in a small town, for example. Or it could just be that that the story is about some piece of what it is to be a human being, and we can all relate to it. So this next story is in the collection, and I'll show the photo in a minute because it's a great photo too. But it's not really necessarily specifically set in the Midwest. It's one of the few stories that doesn't really have a strong sense of setting to it. But it's in the book because it was a piece that spoke to me and to the other folks choosing which stories were going to be included. Just because we've all experienced nights like this, and that's the title of the story, Nights Like This. Here's the photo, just sort of a night sky with the moon peeking through a cloud. So this is Nights Like This. It's that night in the summer when your open windows mean nothing, when your bed is just stuffed heat, when the cicadas have started to drop like chitinous rain, staggering drunk on dying, singing, what's gone wrong, what's gone wrong, when there's nothing but darkness and the moon has fled like a fickle ally, and sleep denies you the sweet water of dreams, that merciless time when getting out of bed is too much and staying in bed is of no use. When there's a tickle at the back of your throat and a pressure in your bladder, and you're trying to lie still because that's how sleep works. Isn't that how sleep works, you ask to no one you can see? And then you wonder if you've truly forgotten how to do it. How if you can forget how to sleep, might you also forget how to breathe? And that this is how it must feel to be buried alive, stifled, cramped, desperate, and unable to alter your circumstance. You think of the people in your past that have died, that are lost in those holes in the soil where you too rarely visit, who would chastise you for your inattention had they a lingering voice. These people you know only through story and photograph and reputation, but without whom you wouldn't be here now in this bed, not sleeping. And then about those people who might be dead, but that of whom you've lost track as time blinds you. Your first best friend, your sixth grade music teacher who wore purple, that kid across the street who kept snakes, that love that casually broke your heart, that other love that seemed to do it on purpose, and that time that you were the asshole, because everyone is someone's asshole. Everyone is the villain of someone's story, flat and mustache twirling and as devoted to evil as the deep of the night that holds on to you and won't let you go, won't even let you rest, won't let you stop thinking, won't let you stop seeing things in the shadows of the room, summoning up the terror of possibilities, one after the other. Your heart, your weight, who you love, who you don't, the last time you smoked, the first time you drank, the secret promises to do better, to commit no further sin, that you'll go to church and call your grandmother and send money to every cause on the TV, if only, if only, if only. Nights like this are not when ghosts come to you, touching your cheek and whispering inchoate. Nights like this are when you reach out to us. So again, the flash form allows for this this curious thing to happen where you have a character coming into sharp focus very suddenly, and telling their story, or telling really not even their story, but a small part of their story, a small and significant, super significant part of their story, such that we can imagine the larger story that has already taken place, right? So in some ways, flash fiction is telling us either the prelude to something that's about to happen or the aftermath of something that has already happened. And by showing readers that element of the story, we can somehow get the rest of the story, the larger story that would take pages and pages and pages more to tell in full. But instead we get this little snippet of emotional detail that suggests the larger story. A lot of those are done with character and through voice. And so I'm going to read one of those from the collection that's very character-based and really talks about the immediate moment is visceral, it's concrete, but it's sort of reflecting a farther away story, something that's happened in the past that really isn't on the page, and we just get this character's thoughts on what's gone before. So this is a story called 220s. Here's the photo for that. You can see a lot of these photos are landscapes, which I think was one of the things we were trying to do, was marry narrative to landscape instead of just character. It was too easy to show interesting photos of these faces of the Midwest. We wanted there to be some landscapes in there as well. And we ended up including quite a few of them, actually. So this is 220s. It was raining again the last time I saw you. I had just pulled into Eisner's parking lot to get crackers for chili, and you were walking in to fill a paper sack full of meals without me. It was raining when we met, too. After the basketball game, I walked you home. We shared an umbrella. Our first thing as a couple, you said. Everything was wet, promise. Even the gum on the sidewalk looked chewable again. My first impulse was to protect you, keep your hair from losing its shape, keep your shoulders dry. I gave you more than half the umbrella, your side plus half of mine. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. A man lays his coat over a mud puddle. He walks closest to the road to keep the dirt from splashing up onto the dress of the woman on their arm. He works and comes home and doesn't complain. He rubs your back before he falls asleep. He gets up, goes to work again the next morning, and doesn't ask why there's not coffee made. It's true that things grow when they're unattended, and I guess that's what happened between you and me. The rain, it'll do things to a landscape. The ivy on the side of the house, our house, now just mine again, is actually growing under the clapboard and into the walls. I don't have the heart to pull them out. So our house, my house, is one big looming hug of vine, this dank green that smells like water left in a tire. I'd asked for the rug that you took when you left. I loved that rug, I said. You didn't even know we had a rug until it was gone, you said. But I miss it now that it's not there, I said. You gave me $40. Get a new one, you said. And those were the last words. I never got a new rug, kept those 220s in my wallet. Until that day, I saw you at the grocery store. You were walking in shoes that I recognized. I fished an envelope out of the glove box and flattened the 220s inside and sealed it. On the front, I wrote, "It wasn't about the rug," and didn't sign it. I ran over to your car without an umbrella to put it under your wipers, knowing it would get soaked, knowing you wouldn't care, because rain polishes everything. It builds and it ruins, but mostly it's us, you and I, our story upside down and washed away like some beautiful raindrop dream. So there's a good amount of pathos, I guess, emotional resonance in the stories in this, partially because I think the photos kind of gave me anyway a sense of melancholy, and so we tended to put those together with stories that were also melancholic to some degree. The curious thing was when something would be more comedic. It was harder to fit photos with something that had some humor to it. This is so I'm going to read one of the ones that was a little more comedic, just so we don't get too depressed this evening. This is called Now Hiring at the Hog Trough. The Hog Trough was a local restaurant that really was a place we went to eat quite a bit in the small town that I was from. And I won't go into too much about it. Here's the photo of it that goes with it. The sign there's at the high school. Have you made anyone bleed or cry lately? Go Raiders. That's the Moequa High Raiders. Moequa is the small town in Illinois that I'm from. So this is a piece that I imagined the Hog Trough restaurant would put in the local paper looking for someone to hire. So that's the form of this piece of flash. Now hiring at the Hog Trough. Join the best team in the Shelby County area. The Hog Trough has been a staple of Moequa's dining scene for decades, starting in the old mall in the 1970s and moving to what used to be Wendell's Diner at the corner of Old Route 51 and Madison when the mall burned down and became the gravel lot by the elevators. Now the Hog Trough is seeking a mature, energy, bubbly go-getter with strong people skills, someone with a willingness to work, someone with a smile for everyone, and someone who isn't Brenda Bowers. We offer flexible hours with competitive pay and a supportive working environment. Successful applicants must have a friendly demeanor and high standards of grooming. Hair nets are provided, as are Hog Trough shirts and aprons. Strong preference given to those candidates with a working knowledge of gravies, the ability to help roll out sweet dough, and show up for work at the butt crack of dawn. Also, successful applicants must be okay with language like the butt crack of dawn and not think that's some sort of, quote, sexual harassment just waiting to happen, unquote, which it just plain wasn't, Brenda. Other requirements for the position. Please don't have question authority tattooed on your wrist. When you deliver the check, please don't refer to the cost of the food as unreasonable damage. Please don't claim that our rolls are made with the fat of unrepentant children from the Methodist Church. Please don't refill the crab salad and ambrosia and tapioca pudding on the salad bar by saying not a salad and more fat for the fatties. Under no circumstances should you ever call out sweet when you're serving. All of these are behaviors that will not be tolerated and are not in keeping with the Hog Trough team spirit. Benefits include a family atmosphere, a strong local patronage, the knowledge that you're participating in your township's economy, and free pie slices to take home when the meringue has started to separate. As a family business, the Hog Trough supports the local football team, Go Raiders, as well as booster activities. As such, the restaurant will participate in Raider Tip Day during the playoffs, where 50% of all proceeds will go to support road travel for the team. It will not be considered so weird, right, if someone's tips are somehow exceptionally low on days such as these. You weren't fooling anyone, Brenda. The Hog Trough is an equal opportunity employer with one very specific exception. Brenda, we're serious. I know you think it's funny to keep applying for your old job, but we had to let you go for a reason. I think they're hiring down at the Shell station. Tell your dad I said hey. So there's a few of those kinds of stories in the collection just to lighten things up a little bit next to some of the history of the place and some of the melancholic reverie of the book. The book ends, and I'm going to read the last piece here with a piece that was actually originally the frontispiece to the book, but we moved it to the back because it had this sort of sense of finality to it. And I'm really glad that we did move it. It as the frontispiece to the book, I think it would have been too somber a tone. But it puts a period at the end of the sentence in a nice way for the collection. This is more like microfiction, really, which is usually 100 to 200 words as opposed to 500 to 1,000. But it's still within that flash range. Here's the photo for this one. This is the last photo I'll be showing you. The other stories don't have photos with them. But this is the last one from this book, and this is called Why You Sell Your Father's Farm. It's dark now. The fireflies have stopped arcing around the backyard like drunken headlights on gravel back roads. The watermelon rinds and paper cups are in the trash bin out back, waiting to be burned. The ham has been sliced and passed around like communion. Hands have been shaken, condolences offered, visits planned that will never be made. There's half a cake wrapped up on the counter, 6 deviled eggs left in the fridge. The clock on the stove glows green, and from where you're sitting at the kitchen table for what might be the last time, you can't read the numbers. You have stayed too long. You know this like it's scratched into your bones. Your eyes will not stay open, and when they do, they see the wrong things. Pipe smoke, mud-caked boots, grain receipts, coffee cups, ghosts of a time when you were someone's child. Your father is everywhere here. Each footprint on the soil feels like trespass. His tractor will not turn over for you, and the barn door opens with the sound of gutted sows and ungreased tiller wheels. His seed company cap is still on the recliner in the den, too big for your head. Your mother's chicken and pie is baked into the kitchen walls. It is not for you. It's carved into the bark of every pine in the shelter belt. I am not yours forever. So yeah, that's just a sampling from Flatland. If you want a copy of Flatland, by the way, it's available on Amazon. But if you can go to the Bronze Man Books website, you can find that through my website pretty easily and buy it directly from them. It supports those small presses better. And that's just better for the world than feeding the great monster that has become Amazon. I want to read just 2 more pieces, and then I'll turn it over for questions, and we'll talk about all the stuff. One story I just wrote for a friend of mine who wanted he's doing a collection on marijuana, and I did a 420 reading for him just last week, a couple weeks ago, and so he asked me to write something new that he could include in the book, and so this is what I wrote. This is again, no photo with this one because it's not in the same book, but this is again, a lighter piece, I think, but it's got some nice detail work, and it's a good indication of, again, things that we bring to our work those filtering elements. One of the filtering elements in this, for me, were two major obsessions of mine when I was a kid, and that was television, especially after school television, where all the old black and white reruns were always being shown, and then also Star Wars, which I was 8 in 1977 when the first Star Wars movie came out. So I was the perfect age to buy into that for the rest of my life, and I kind of have. My kids are tired of it anyway. I know that. So this is again kind of lighthearted, but also has some gravitas to it. I hope. This is called Empire Carpets and Not Talking to Steve. When I start losing my mind and pieces of information are falling away bit by bit in reverse order of how firmly they had a foothold in the trenches of my brain, the phone number for Empire Carpets will be the last thing to go. 588-2300. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds Chicagoland together. I owe that to my stepbrother Steve and all the pot he smoked. I think about it mostly when I'm enjoying all the pot I smoke. That too I owe to Steve. I'd tell him that if I called him up at the Harold's Chicken Shack on Wabash, where I think he still works, but I don't. It took balls, Steve once told me, for Empire Carpets to keep calling itself that in the late 70s, to cheerfully sing it to us when the Empire was the bad guys. But maybe that was what made them cool. They were the tyrants of Cut Loot Pile, sending out stormtrooper installers by the very next day. They were the Grandma fucking Tarkin of wall-to-wall shag, the Darth Vader in the hallway of your own Cloud City. We have altered your plans for hardwood flooring. Pray we do not alter them further. Steve was already 16 by the time he and his dad came to live with us at our house in Berwyn. This was 1983. I was 12. The first time I met Steve and his dad was when they showed up one bleary Saturday afternoon and we all went to see Return of the Jedi, and then Steve and his dad never left. Mom had a single-story brown brick bungalow that used to belong to her aunt. It had stained glass windows to either side of the fireplace, and my mom loved those windows, or did anyway, till Steve and I busted one with an errant jart meant for me. We were in the side yard, supposed to be mowing. Steve missed me on purpose, I think, and took out the window on the right. I took the fall for it, told Mom I'd done it. But I also told Steve later that he had the aim of a stormtrooper. He punched me in the chest, but Steve was laughing, and so it didn't even hurt. I took everything Steve dished out. Steve was supposed to watch me every day after school until Mom got home from her shift at the grocery store and Steve's dad got home from his maintenance job in Grant Park. We had a black and white 19-inch in the front room, and I was Steve's remote control, flipping channels for him while he sat on our plaid couch and lit up. We'd watch old reruns, and Steve had this habit of cutting the boredom of commercial breaks by tackling me out of nowhere. He'd pin me down, knees on arms, his crotch too sweaty close to my face, and he'd slap my head repeatedly while yelling out questions. Finish the series, he'd yell. Be smarter. 3 of the 6 bounty hunters on Cloud City, he'd yell, and I'd have to cough out Bosk slap, Dengar slap, IG slap 80 at slap 8. And then he'd stop, tell me good job, and then we'd go back to watching the Brady Bunch, messing up our idea of what blended families really were about. Steve's tests weren't all about Star Wars. His favorite became Empire Carpets. The first time he did it, the commercial came on TV, and suddenly I was on the ground, pinned under Steve, and he was yelling, 588. I didn't know what he meant. I was still thinking bounty hunters. 588, he yelled again, and then it clicked. 2300, I cried, 2300, and somehow got one arm free and pushed him off. Some 10 years later, I still pay attention to the ads for Empire Carpets. I smoke a bowl and notice how much they're charging by the square yard or how many rooms you can finish for one low price. I listen for the voice of the Empire Carpet guy, his voice granular and sweet enough to blanket a ham. I watch for the cartoon magic carpet to flow by, leaving the phone number in its swishing wake. But mostly I remember thinking that I could save up $7, only $7, so I could buy 1 square yard of deep pile. An Empire Carpet guy would come to my house. I figured he could probably set some things right, him and his awesome mustache. The plans come and go. It's what I learned from my stepfather, who left my mom and her suddenly single stained glass window a few months after Steve turned 18 and he'd moved out. Steve and I stayed in touch for a while, off and on. The last time I heard from Steve was on my 16th birthday. Excuse me. He called me, told me he'd left a copy of Siddhartha in a Ziploc on the side yard for me, under the bush where I'd lost my Yoda. The book was hollowed out and contained 16 fat blunts. There was a note, too, said, "You've just taken your first step into a larger world. Contemplate." I've done just that in the years since. Contemplated, smoked. I've even read some of the text around the rough cut hole in the center of Siddhartha, and I think I'd like to read the middle sometime. When I smoke, when I contemplate, I think of Steve. I've never smoked with him. I think about calling him at Harold's, where he may or may not work. I don't do it, but I think about it. I imagine Steve answering the phone to take my chicken order, and I'd say 588, and he'd say, "What?" And I repeat myself, and he'd recognize my voice and say, "Jesus." And then I'd yell, 588. And then I'd take a hit and he'd laugh, but he'd also say, "Fuck you." And then, "Good job," and refuse to finish the series because really neither one of us wants to. Excuse my coughing. So that was again one of the newer pieces that I've put together. This last piece is like I said at the beginning, from the novel that should be coming out soon, I hope. And it sorry, I have to pull this up. It takes place at an orphanage in 1978, 79, back in the Midwest. It's again a Midwest book. The book I'm working on now is the first book that I've written that isn't regional, meaning it's not back in Illinois. This is based at a place where I grew up. And again, this comes back to what I was saying earlier about, excuse me, about, the whole writing what you know, writing from your own experiences. There we go. Sorry about that. It disappeared for a second. The writing from your own experiences. I actually worked at this on the grounds of this abandoned orphanage. They were trying to redevelop it. And I worked there one summer at a business that had started up on that campus. And really what we did was to very carefully and respectfully break into these old abandoned buildings and look around. And we found was just amazing. The book goes into this much more in detail, but suffice it to say that the place had closed down very quickly. And so there was a school on the campus, and on some of the blackboards was still writing assignments in chalk from 20 years before. And so it stuck in my head as this place that I wanted to write about, and I finally got to do that. I'm grateful for that. One of the conceits of the novel is that there's a present through story, and then the ghosts, the literal ghosts of the place, get to have their say in these flash chapters interspersed throughout the narrative. It's sort of a coming home story, but also a ghost story, a literary ghost story, which it's just another fondness that I've had for quite a while, is the ghost story, classic ghost stories. So this is one of those pieces of flash that kind of tells the history of the area. And this is from chapter 15, actually, called The Groundskeepers. We remember the Lawlers, our neighbors for the 110 years of the home's existence, from start to finish, and then some. The first Lawler we knew was Lincoln Joshua Lawler, then a relatively young man who sold a parcel of his back 40 to Jesse Fell for the school, with the agreement that the state wouldn't annex more of his arable soil. Lincoln Joshua had been a stout man, like all the Lawlers before and after, with a mustache that helped frame his roundish head and overalls that did little to flatten his rounded middle. He was big in all ways, great valleys and peaks. His laughter was a bell pealing, resounding over his fields like a preacher's voice. But his sorrow and his anger were deep wells that he kept sealed under thick and soundless caps. His wife saw it, his children too. Lincoln Joshua hadn't wanted to be a farmer. He had thought about building cities as a young man, of tall structures with gorgeously rounded windows to offset the straightness of the vertical line, with features like balustrades and buttresses and apses and cornices. He dreamed of cantilevering. He owned a single book on the architecture of Chicago, which he fell asleep reading in his wingback chair by the stove nearly every night before he woke up in the morning, ate 3 fried eggs piled on a thick slice of buttered bread, and trudged back out into his fields. He began each day looking for the ISCS administration building on his horizon. It was his North Star, the thing he'd helped to bring about in this world that wasn't meant to be eaten by hogs or cattle or men. That building was his, or so he considered it, and he'd gaze at the eagle on the cupola from far away like it was a monument to him and what he could have been. Lincoln Joshua shot himself one night in his wingback chair, less than a year after his wife had been taken by flu, leaving the farm and the house to his only son, Charles. Lincoln Joshua had put his architecture book on the shelf with a note inside to his son. "It's all for you now," the note read. Charles, never one for reading, likewise never found that note. The book was sitting in the same place on the shelf when Charles himself passed through life at 49, from a new round of worldwide flu, having barely made a mark in the world outside of possessing a wife and 2 children. His wife, Mary, rented out the land to support her and the kids until her oldest was of an age that he could take out a loan with the bank for a tractor. That son was Charles Jr., and he and his little brother James worked the farm for the rest of their lives, having little to do with the home, but to mow it on the regular, which became the job of Charles Jr.'s son Grant, who inherited the farm on the deaths of the father and his father and uncle in a car accident outside Towanda in 1956. He and his own son Mikey were the school groundskeepers from then onward to closure, mowing in the summer, scooping snow with their cat in the winters. The inherent workforce of the home accomplished the rest: the tending to gardens, the raking of leaves in autumn, the planting of buds, and the watering where needed. The Lawlers provided the soil, the home kept itself flowering. Grant Lawler liked to portray himself a busy man. His son Mikey, who never went by any other name, cared little for how he was thought of by others. Mikey is still here in the flesh. The other Lawlers come and go, usually on their own land, though Lincoln Joshua sometimes strolls past administration, gazing upwards. It would be his great-grandson Grant who'd sell again less than a year after inheriting, this time a parcel of the farm to expand the home's east side. At the time, the state was interested in building new modern dorms to replace the old 2-story frame cottages on Girls Row. An architect had drawn up plans for a trio of Y-shaped single-floor structures with basements for storage and protection from occasional tornadoes and the possibilities of the atom bomb. The new dorms would be air-conditioned, shared individual bathrooms, 4 beds each. The new dorms would never be constructed. They would remain in dreams. State funding fell through, money was misspent and misappropriated, but the plans were nonetheless drafted, and the plans were what were important. The buildings were existent, if only in theory, each 3-spoked dorm with its modern design and a patio with a grand cantilevered roof, an oasis vision which still makes Lincoln Joshua's occasional smile grow as big and round as his belly. So just to kind of bring this full circle, all of the stories that I've read for you this evening have all been regional in a sense. They've all been from the Midwest, set in the Midwest, but they've also all been filtered through a lens such that they would be hopefully, at least this is the desire of any writer, to speak to a reader in such a way that they recognize themselves in it. So the old saw of write what you know, the the advice to filter your experiences through the voice of characters, of narrative, is absolutely important and absolutely vital. And it's also vital to then open up that experience and let others into it. And the way that we do that as writers is by providing those details where it feels real. We put the illusion up, the veil of fiction up, and hope we can make our readers not only understand what we're saying, but thank us when the story has been told. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions either through chat or if we can open up the audio, I'm happy to field questions that way as well.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to stop the recording.